This is Omnath, or at least it's a model of Omnath that is available from Wizkids Games this July, so I got it earlier than it's available to the public. It's not a sponsored video. They enjoyed me painting Rakdos so much that Wizkids were kind enough to send me a load of models, including this, which made me audibly gasp when I got it out of the box. We're going to transform today in this video from the colourless clear plastic you've just seen into this, which is a relatively speed painted, primarily or almost exclusively airbrushed Omnath. So there's going to be a painting vlog similar to the Morven Val, similar to the Rakdos, but the thing is, it's not going to be like an easy beginner's guide because I'm going to be using an airbrush. And I understand that most people don't have airbrushes. It's quite a balls deep thing. And Omnath is going to include his Cheeto hand, and he's going to include his Colgate hand. That's right, icy toothpaste fingers, here we go. And of course his mayo hand as well. All of this done by an airbrush, all of this done in less than 2 hours. Because if you're a hobby enthusiast, get an airbrush. It'll save you so much fucking time. But before we get into the size comparisons of the model and the painting, a quick history lesson on Omnath himself. He was originally the Locus of Mana, a little 3-mana card in Magic the Gathering that was, whilst it had an interesting ability of not letting your mana filter out of your pool, he was just a big dumb beater. He was a big elemental creature on the plane of Zendikar that absorbed mana and then looked to fist fight with it. And by fist fight, I mean punch your opponent in the face. On our return to Zendikar, we got Omnath Locus of Rage, where he became a lot lighter in colour, got hands that looked like he'd been eating flaming hot Doritos or Cheetos, and then he got a landfall ability where he made 5/5s. When they died, it shot things for 3. And not just the 5/5s that he made, any elemental you control dies. So he became an elemental commander, alongside still caring about lands, if not mana. Then in M20 we had Omnath come back and he was stood in a pool of water and therefore ergo got blue in his mana cost, which meant that he got to have draw a card written on him somewhere. He was again more lined up with elementals as a tribal thing, so he dealt damage to any target equal to the number of elementals you control when he entered the battlefield, but also lands entering the battlefield put counters on elementals, and if you controlled 8 or more lands you draw a card. This is where Omnath went from being flavorful and powerful to very, very powerful. And then on our second return to Zendikar, our third time on the plane, a popular fan favourite plane, we got Omnath Locus of Creation. Whereas previous versions, Angry Ragey Boy was kind of overshadowed by the fact that the Eldrazi were waging war on the plane, Omnath Locus of Creation was kind of at the forefront of Zendikar in terms of its marketing and everyone being like, oh wow, some of these cards are a bit too good, aren't they? Omnath Locus of Creation was so good in fact, he only lasted around 17 days in Standard before being banned. But that isn't Omnath's fault. We've seen a huge power creep in Magic cards in general over the last couple of years, with the downturn finally coming with the latest sets, so Omnath was just part of a wider problem. This Omnath got 4 colours of mana, so he went from green to green-red to green-red-blue, and now he gained white, and his little mayonnaise hand here. Very strong, very powerful, and the fact that he just replaces himself and then generates you mana, you have to do very little in a green-based EDH deck as him as your commander to get very far, and you have to do very little in Standard too. The last 2 iterations of Omnath, the ones that have blue in their mana cost because blue-green is quite good in Magic, keep showing up across Historic and Modern and Pioneer in fringe elemental or lands-based decks, and I'm here for it. I actually do quite like Omnath. I didn't really care for his first 2 iterations, but once they powered him up by adding blue, I guess the spike in me got on board with Omnath. The art we're going to focus on today is the Chris Aran art from Omnath Locus of Creation. It is very obvious that this Wizkids model is directly modelled after this one. I mean, here's the art, and here's the model in terms of posing. Now, bear in mind, I have painted this myself to try and be as close to Chris Van's thing as possible, with my limited skills, but it's kind of clear that the arms clawing up the sky and him leaning back, and the kind of abs that might have been in Chris Van's art, but we're not quite sure. As far as size comparisons go, this is Omnath, this is my hand, this is how big Omnath is compared to my hand, and here we have a human fighter with a sword. This is a Wizkids D&D model as well, for size comparisons. If you're looking to pick this up for D&D, this is how he'll look compared to most player characters. Now, I own a lot of Warhammer, and Warhammer's a popular minigame, so here is a Primaris Space Marine, an Assault Intercessor, running forward, not quite stood up straight, for another size comparison if you're looking to use Omnath alongside Warhammer models of some kind. As you can see, he's real fucking big. Here is a Redemptor Dreadnought, a chonky boy. If we just regard the mast, half the size, And then we've got Magnus Demon Primarch of the Thousand Suns, who still doesn't match up to Omnath's height. His wingspan does make him as imposing, but Omnath is really fucking big. And then, if you're not into 40k, let's do some D&D. We've got Fighter with Sword. We've got Air Djinn, I think. We've got a Froghemoth, which is its own magic card, and a Water Elemental. Yeah, Omnath is huge. Absolutely massive. I have no idea what Wizkids' actual price point for him will be, but he's out in July. And here we have some other size comparisons. We have an Admiral Akbar from the original Kenner Star Wars figurine line, because, you know, that's a good point of reference for some nerds. And of course, obligatory Pikachu amiibo. Just to make sure everyone understands the scale of this fucking thing. In the Chris Van art for Omnath, there are floating blocks of ground, there's vegetation, there's vines, and there's a hedron in the foreground. Now, if I was going to spend a lot of time on this, maybe I could have badly constructed some floating stuff. Hedrons aren't a big part of Omnath's identity because he isn't really tied to them in terms of lore. He's often represented being in parts of nature, and of course in the second iteration of him there was a lot of this bismuth, Eldrazi leftover wasted land stuff. However, he is one of the most iconic Zendikar creatures, so I decided I was going to put some Zendikari Hedrons on the base to really get rid of this negative space and build a more of a dynamic look to him as if he's part of a wider world. Now, I recently got a 3D printer, but I did not 3D print these because this was happened before I got the 3D printer. So big shout out to that Mr. Shy who helped me get these 3D printed and usable for this base. Bear in mind, these are just free STLs we found on Thingiverse or similar. This is not a thing you can buy from Stu directly, although he does have a 3D printing model shop, because this is, well, I don't know. I don't know if this is actually Wizards' intellectual property. How much can they really trademark a geometric shape? But yes, Stu's shop, there'll be a link in the description below. He's a wonderful individual. You should check out his YouTube videos as well. And he helped me with my first foray into using 3D printed parts. Now, as you can see here, I am clipping and going to be sanding this down to get it to fit on the base off of like its raft, as we call it, from its 3D printed element. You should always be wearing a mask and goggles when doing this. A mask is super important because once you start sanding and it goes into fine grade dust, resin is very bad for you. It will fuck up your lungs, so don't inhale it. Wear a mask. Don't be an anti-masker. The goggles are not a thing that are always suggested, but as you can see, this is very brittle, and it flies all over the fucking place. I lost bits behind the computer as I was doing this. I think I would rather wear like goggles, like a cheap £5 pair of protective goggles, than get a piece of resin to the eye and have some sort of eye problems for the next couple of years, if not longer. So let's just practice some safety, shall we? We super glue these to the base. We use some of this stuff that helps super glue set quicker, so that we have to sit there holding it to it whilst it sets naturally, and onwards we go to painting. Like I said at the beginning, this is going to be airbrushing the whole thing. I've never fully airbrushed a model before with minimal paint. I have used the airbrush on larger models like Bellacore from GW, but this will be the first time that I'm going to do it almost exclusively, with the aim of doing it as fast as possible. I want to get this done and dusted so I can crack on with my other daily videos, because I'm a slave to the YouTube system. This is a new camera angle compared to where I painted Morven Val, and hopefully this will show you more of the airbrushing action. Now, you can prime your models black or white or grey. It really depends upon what your end result is going to be. When you're trying to do bright colours on your model, you should be priming with a much lighter colour, because it helps for the paints that go over the top that might not be fully transparent to take on some of the properties of the stuff underneath. In this case, it's going to be the white that we're priming it with from Vallejo. The clear plastic didn't take the first layer all that well. It looked a little bit tacky and running. What I decided to do to avoid this being a problem was just let it cure the paint on top of the plastic for about, I don't know, 20 minutes whilst I fart-arsed around on Twitter and YouTube, and then went back in with a second layer. In the eternal words of Duncan Rhodes, sometimes it really is best to put 2 thin coats on. Once we started getting there, we had this like snow monster. He looks like a big pile of snow. Or I guess you could go further from snow. You could say it's a big cummy-wummy monster. I then mixed up a very light green using some mixtures of Army Painter and Vallejo greens and some white ink as well. And this was mixed in a separate pot to my airbrush. Some people mix in the cup, but I don't recommend it, because if you have one bit of thick paint go down into the tube, you're going to get a blockage, and it's going to add 5 or 10 minutes of cleanup of the brush to your airbrushing time. So I am now a convert to mixing in a separate tub and then putting into the brush. Here I'm going for a nice even coverage of this green. I don't think I'm trying to really keep anywhere else not this green. I think I leave some of the underleg and underarm not this green because I'm going to hit it with a darker green to create some shadowed recesses. By the time I'm finished with this green, he does look like a big booger monster, and I also have left some of the hands as well, because the hands are going to be hit by multiple other colours and inks to try and get that nice shaded gradient. So putting green underneath was not necessary, and the white might even improve like the brightness of the paint going over the top. Using the same pot as before, I add some darker greens, a bit of green ink, to darken up a similar mixture to what we had before, so that the gradient isn't hugely off. It has some of the same tone to it, but it's just going to be a darker colour, a darker green, for us to create the shadows, and the darker green bits you see in the original art. I hit parts of the base body, I hit under the leg and under the arms to create a darker shade to the green. I mix up a light yellow, because 2 to 3 of the hands have a light yellow tone in them. Even underneath the red Cheeto hand and underneath the mayonnaise hand, it's a yellow. And you can see me here using an old swamp as a masking card to not hit behind the hand that I'm firing the brush at. I do a similar thing with the yellows on other hands here, but obviously moving the model itself to spray past the hand to not contaminate the green that I've already made. I will a bit later allow some of that to spray onto the body and the leg to create what's called an OSL effect, an object source lighting effect. You saw me doing it there, so that the glow of the arm is represented in the body of the full model, but you don't want to do that too much. I guess subtlety is key, and you want to go lightly because you can always put on more, but you can't take it off. I've recently overpainted this Scarab Demon Prince way too bright while painting late at night, and now I've got to go back in and probably just repaint the whole thing, because knocking it back is harder than layering it up. I go to a much brighter yellow now by adding, I think it's Ice Yellow by Vallejo, and a splash of yellow ink to really brighten the yellow color. Brighten the yellow color, that's an obvious thing, isn't it? I'm just brightening the yellow here. I'm trying to sound clever, I'm trying to sound paintery, but I'm just being a fucking moron. It's time to get that nice, like, peppermint Colgate blue on the go. For this, I'm using a bit of Vallejo Air Blue. I'm mixing it with a little bit of white ink. I think a splash of, I think it's Void Shield from Vallejo. I'm very bad at keeping track of my recipes. I'm just mixing it in the tub, getting it to where I think it looks good, and then we're going to get all up in that hand. And the blue is a stark contrast to the green. It doesn't look out of place, but it looks very evident that the hand is blue. That's an obvious statement too, but you know what I mean. It's got a contrast to it. It adds interest to the model. At the moment, it's kind of an amorphous blue or green blob, sorry, with yellow tips and a blue arm. Oh, it adds something special to it. Once you've got the initial blue down, I get a little bit of white ink into the blue to knock it down to a lighter color, and then we're going to get in there and add that as a highlight. I'm getting quite close to the model here, trying to highlight sort of the upper edge, the outer corner of the elbow, and the tips of the fingers and the palm, because that's where it's brighter on the Chris Ran art. Well, that's not true. You can't see the elbow in the Chris Ran art, but the point is, I imagine from behind the elbow would be lighter, because it seems like it would be a place where the upper layer of the epidermis, I don't think he has skin, it's just mana, isn't it? But it'd be tighter over the pointed bit, and therefore you might see a bit more of the underlying energy. This is a fictitious magical beast, so trying to appeal to realism is fucking pointless. So I'm really going by feel and then trying to justify it afterwards in the vlog. Next up is the most nerve-wracking part. I got a bit of orange, splash of yellow ink, and I'm going in with sort of a very dark orangey red to warm up this hand to get it to the lava, the red mana hand. I've joked this entire time about Colgate mayonnaise and Cheetos, and I haven't explicitly stated that each of the hand represents a colour of mana, right? Bottom left is green, top left is white, top right is blue, bottom right is red. So this is the red mana hand. So it does need to read red from a distance, not just outright orange, but I didn't want to go over the top. There is some dark, rich reds in the dripping of the magma, but this model doesn't have dripping magma, unfortunately. So I'm going to be careful with what I do here. And you can see I'm hitting his chest a little bit, and I'm hitting his leg a little bit to give him that glow that you can see in the Chris Ran art. You can see this object source reflection of energy off of the upper layer of his mana weave slash skin, where the red is reflecting from Omnath. Now it's time to make our first attempt at making the Omnath face, which is a glowing central point to the model where it looks like there's a core of mana and energy beneath the surface. Now this is the bit that I don't think I achieved very well in hindsight, and my first attempt just made a big white splosh on his face and some white splotches on his arms, which I later went over with a bit of green paint again to knock back into the main colour scheme. I was not happy with my first attempt at the face. Whilst the white was drying, I got in and just sprayed the base and the hedrons with my go-to dark grey from Vallejo with, of course, all these paints are thinned. Even the air paints are thin, but thinned to varying levels. You can't just put the paint straight in the airbrush. You have to thin it with airbrush thinner. So this is dark grey from Vallejo. If you're using any army paint that paints into an airbrush, you really have to thin them because they're thicker. They're thicker than, I don't know, thicker than me and my dump truck ass. We set down our airbrush and do our only bit of brush work for this model, which is going to be dry brushing with a brush, ironically, the base. Now what I've done here is I've put a lighter grey, Celestian grey I think from Citadel onto the brush. It's got a slight blue tint to it, but it's very light compared to the dark grey used from Vallejo. You put it on your makeup brush, a cheap makeup brush from a shitty shop like Savers, and then you just wipe off the majority of the paint, leaving some pigment on the brush. You rub it off onto a kitchen towel or something to the side, and then you just dry brush over places with texture. Now the rocks and these hedrons are wonderful because of all the indents for picking up this pigment. This is a great way to highlight rough textured areas like fur and rock. The amount of paint you want to knock off of it depends upon the approach you want to get. If you're trying to get a fine highlight, like a very subtle highlight, knock most of it off. When you're dry brushing earth and gravel and dirt and rock, it can just vary depending on how much you want to get of the next tone on. And you can do this to varying levels. You can do like 3 different levels of grey to get a really interesting look to it. But again, I'm firing along at like speed here to try and get this done in a good amount of time. I had this bright idea to try and dry brush some dark green over the top of the lighter areas to basically sort of layer or put a crust over the brightness of the internal part of Omnath. However, I hate how it comes out. It looks messy and mucky, and it looks nowhere near as good as the creamy blends you get from an airbrush, and it's obvious that it's been dry brushed and it doesn't look good. So I stopped doing this almost immediately, clean off my brush, and we're going to cover that with some more green later. We get a clog, so I'm full on cleaning the airbrush out, like full on needle out, cleaning everything up. It's time to fix that fucking face. So we make a very, very, very pale green, and we slather it onto his face in quite a wide area, and we splash a little bit onto the central parts of the green hand, and well, just the green hand. I don't think we put it onto the white hand. And then my plan is to lighten it and lighten it and lighten it with white ink as we spray smaller and smaller concentrations onto the face to try and get this underlying energy look. We finish off by black rimming the base, which is a term that is funny because it has the word rimming in it. I was going to use basing paste to really create like a bit of a terrain look underneath the rock, but because of time, I opted not to. Also, I guess this gives it more of a display piece feel when it's on top of like a black rim like this. So we just get in there with black, Abaddon black from Citadel, watered down with a bit of water. And then we just get in there with 2 thin coats to get it nice and dark. We finish off the base to give some visual interest and to also hide the bits where the hedron's connected to the base and were like, you know, sharp angled and stuff with some gamer grass red flower tufts. I think it would be a crime to have a Zendikar themed base that doesn't have some sort of plant life on it, even if he is stood on a big fucking rock. I was originally, like I said, going to use basing paste, similar to what I did in the Morphin Val video, to seal up the cracks and then also underneath the rock and everything, but time was against me a little bit. So I decided to use these to hide it. It's a quick hobby hack. Hide your rough edges with vegetation and gamer grass. Yeah, these flowers are beautiful, and I think it really adds a distinct, again, contrast, right? Because the model is primarily green, so having some nice reds like this is great. And that, my friends, is Omnath, Locus of Creation, Locus of Rage, Locus of the Royal. It's obviously Locus of Creation, but he has many, many names. He actually hasn't been statted in any of the D&D supplemental stuff that's come out. There's been no Zendikar book, and there's only been one, like, Arcana thing, didn't give any legendary books. So, I mentioned this to some people on my Discord. Namely, Nomnath took up the mantle. Nomnath is one of my patrons who has got a big big passion for all things Omnath. So Nomnath put together Omnath the Flickering Heart. There will be a link to this character sheet in the description below on D&D Beyond. It's a custom-made sheet for Omnath, making him a challenge rating 24 sort of end boss character for a game of D&D. It may not be super balanced, but it's really fun that there is one, and there was some input from other people on my Discord as well for Nomnath to go back and fix. I mean, originally Nomnath forgot to calculate the HP, so he's a 31 HP boss that could be one-shot by pretty much anything above level 4, but that's been fixed now. Omnath is a very cool and now iconic part of Magic's canon and Zendikar, and this model is wonderful considering I imagine it's not going to be much more than £30. It really makes GW stuff look very expensive when you look at WizKids cost. It's not a perfect model, and I probably could have done some care to it. One of the legs has a coarse mold line that could have been scraped off, and as I can show you here, the seals where like the extra parts are put onto it, it comes pre-constructed, but obviously it's not molded or printed that way, so you can see these cracks. If I was going for a full-on display piece with a lot more effort and time put into it, you could just green stuff in here, green stuff being a moldable like epoxy resin thing that you can put together, or even liquid green stuff just to seal up the gaps and get rid of that obvious gap. But ultimately, I think I did really well in less than 2 hours. An hour and a half of airbrushing and about half an hour for other bits and bobs too. I am going to try and get my D&D physical group to play against it at some point, because it is such a foreboding model for its size and its weirdness. If you don't know Magic, you might think that head is just a big ball of goo. Lastly, we also have to mention just how ripped this Omnath is. He's got a dump truck, fat booty, and a rippling 6-pack of amps. It's unrealistic beauty standards for elemental creatures in the world of Magic the Gathering. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed the chilled out Bob Ross style of approach to painting. If you've enjoyed it, there will be links in the cards to my Morven Val 40k painting and my Rakdos Lord of Riots painting as well, which took a similar approach to this one. This is still a new fledgling area of content for me. It gives me variety, allows me to express my passions. If you've enjoyed it, please smash that like button and share it with your friends as well. Sharing videos is a great way to support the channel. I've been Vince, also known as PleasantKenobi on the internet. I hope you've enjoyed this. Let me know what you thought in the comment section below, and I'll see you on the next one. Ta-ta for now.